I am the last friend to the most reviled of my brothers. I'm the one who gets to stand in harm's way. So I can stand there and take the hits for a client who's afraid, and I can be the angel that they're praying for, or that their family is praying for. And if I don't do that job the way they're hoping I would, it's not just that I didn't do a good enough job, it's that I've got to do the best job, or else I took the place of the person that was going to do the best job, and I'm responsible for that harm. So for me, it's a really major responsibility, but I take it gratefully.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to The Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with attorneys at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of the various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Jacqueline Goodman, who runs Goodman Criminal Litigation out in California. Jackie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining with me. We're going to jump over and take a look at your website. This is her law firm. Very easy to remember URL. That's californiadefenselawyer.net, californiadefenselawyer.net. You can also give her a call at 714-266-3945. She specializes, she's a State Bar of California Board of Legal Special, I can't talk today. She's on the board, if I'm not mistaken. And she does all sorts of criminal defense out there in lovely, beautiful, sunny California. We're going to talk about all the things that she does. She's been featured everywhere. She's been on Fox. She's been on CNN, Wall Street Journal. Very well accomplished. And I'm really excited to start talking with her today because I think she's going to have just an incredible amount of insight that we're going to be able to work with. Before we do that, as always, though, we are going to jump over and read from our sponsors. Our first sponsor today is nationalerc.org. You may have noticed that a few years ago, the world went through a pandemic and many businesses were forced to shut down, had reduced hours, supply chain issues, and ultimately suffered from reduced revenue in 2020 and 2021. What you may not know is that Congress passed the CARES Act, which allocated $400 billion in stimulus funds for small businesses that never needs to be paid back, and there is still time to claim it if you've not. It's not a loan like the PPP or Paycheck Protection Program. It is functionally free money in the form of a retroactive tax credit. And this money can be spent in whatever way you see fit for your business. Right now, nationalerc.org is helping small businesses get the maximum amount of money that they can, and you can calculate and see how much you can get back by visiting nationalerc.org. The average small business that they work with gets back over $200,000 to invest in their business that, again, never needs to be paid back. They've helped, I believe, over $1.3 billion get into the hands of small businesses like yourself. And again, there's never any fee unless they are successful in getting funding for you. Visit nationalerc.org to learn more today or to use their free online calculator. Our second sponsor for today is a newer sponsor. We just had them on recently, Andropology. Gentlemen, if you're looking to take charge of your health and feel your best, listen up. Whether it's managing type 2 diabetes, boosting your testosterone levels, or just wanting to increase your overall longevity, get shredded, feel better, Andropology.com has you covered. They dive deep into natural solutions from superfoods like spirulina and tart cherry extract to targeted fitness routines like HIIT, that's high-intensity interval training that can help you reclaim your energy and vitality. At Andropology, it's all about practical, science-based, or science-backed advice tailored specifically for men who want to improve their health without the fluff. Think of it as your go-to guide for navigating the complexities of men's health simplified. From diet tips to supplemental recommendations, they have everything you need to start making positive changes today. Visit Andropology.com to learn more and explore the latest insights on living healthier and having a more vibrant life. That's Andropology.com, where better health begins. All right, then we're going to jump back over here really quickly, and we're going to talk with Jackie. Well, Jackie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm doing really good as well. Thank you very much. Well, Jackie is a celebrated criminal defense lawyer with over 30 years of experience, which by my calculations means she must have been practicing law when she was like 10 years old, give or take. She specializes in defending individuals in high-stakes cases across California. She is certified by the California Bar as a criminal law specialist and has argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, demonstrating her exceptional legal prowess. Goodman's career is marked by her leadership in the legal community, as well as serving as the president of California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, the past president, as well as contributing. Sorry, this is one of those days I've been talking all day and all of a sudden I can't word good. You all know how that goes. Some days you just can't work good. Um, her career is marked by her leadership in the legal community, serving as a past president of California's Attorneys for Criminal Justice and contributing to initiatives that aim to end mass incarceration and improve the criminal justice system. Her notable cases include defending members of the Muslim Student Union, known as the Irvine 11, in a First Amendment rights case, highlighting her commitment to standing by her clients regardless of public opinion. As a respected figure in both local and national legal arenas, she continues to fight for justice while advocating for systemic changes. Having said all that, and it was kind of a mouthful, and I bungled a little bit, but I'm sure I missed so much that I could have. So my very first question to you, Jackie, is what did I miss?
I was really impressed with the person you just described. Listen, I mean, I've been privileged for a really long time to be sitting in the place that I am, to be standing next to people who need me. And as criminal defense lawyers, we're really privileged to have such an impact. And if you understand that and you work toward that, I mean, your cup is just filled over and over and over again. And if you're lucky enough to be involved in more impactful cases, as I've been, then, you know, all the more of the blessings. But for criminal defense lawyers, if we are successful, and we don't lose sight of the goal, then somebody is not going to get 50 to life. Somebody is not going to get tortured by solitary confinement. Someone is going to be back with their family. Some child is going to have their parents at home. There's going to be less violence in society. There's going to be less racism in society. So for me, I've been really blessed to have been involved in some of the things that you just described, because it has really been, you know, my honor to do those things, and probably a lot of luck and maybe some version of, I don't know, imposter syndrome or something. I was talking with someone about that this weekend, actually, a potential client. But I think that, you know, it's just I'm really lucky. I hear that kind of a resume, and I don't think anything other than, oh God, thanks for letting me have been part of that. I mean, the Irvine 11 case, all of my cases changed me for the better. And I'm still a work in progress, but I'm really, really grateful for the experiences I've had.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, the imposter syndrome I've always found is like the flip side of the coin of what they call it, the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So when you don't know a lot, you think you're really, really smart, you got all the knowledge in the world, and when you're really smart, you're like, you know how much you don't know, and you just feel like, oh, everyone must know the things that I know. It really is a fascinating phenomenon that
Yeah.
maybe that's Socratic wisdom, I don't know, but I've always found that fascinating. Well, Jackie, if I didn't know anything about you, if you and I were on an elevator for 30 seconds or so going up, and I was like, oh, hey, what do you do? What do you do? Give me your pitch. Tell me specifically who you help. Tell me why people choose to work with you and your firm.
I can't do that in 30 seconds. I'm going to try. So I'm
We'll
still a
go up to the
criminal.
45th floor. You got a little extra time.
Okay. So I am a criminal defense lawyer. I've been a criminal defense lawyer here in my office in the city of Fullerton for 30 years. And during that time, you know, my practice, as you can imagine, has sort of developed. And I'm also, by the way, barred in Massachusetts and the federal courts, et cetera, United States Supreme Court, as you mentioned. But I also now, as I reach sort of the second half of my career, at least, or let's say like the last third of my career, I've had more of an interest, and I've taken on more of the day, I suppose, in efforts to change the landscape in a larger way. You know, I'd like to have, as I leave this place and I drop the mic, I'd really like to have made a broader impact than strictly with one client at a time, as we do as criminal defense lawyers, which it's really hard to say that you can't quantify your impact if you help one person, it's sort of infinite, right? So I don't mean to belittle the work that criminal defense lawyers do every single day in courtrooms across the country, and really around the world, actually. But I've personally had a lot of time, I think, over my career, to see some of the things that I think are bigger problems in the system that affect not only people who are charged criminally with crimes, because I think people think that's this like distinct group of people, but I'm talking about things that affect us nationally and maybe globally, So I really do mean when I say that we really have to imagine a new way to deal with this, and a way that is smart, and a way that kind of goes back to what we learned in kindergarten, but like be nice to people. I know that sounds crazy, but it's not okay to treat people the way we do. And you have to treat them like that. You have to otherize them in order to put them in cages and put them away for long periods of time. And what we find is, ironically, that makes us all less safe. So my job now is a lot of representing individuals, but about a third of my work, a third of my week, is working on larger scale initiatives to try to make an impact more broadly, to make the world a better place, to make communities safer.
I think there's something really wise there that, when you dehumanize people, you dehumanize all of humanity. And when you do that, you do make the world a less safe place and a more dangerous place. Because anytime you dehumanize people, you lose that intrinsic humane quality that makes us all human. So,
Right.
so let me ask you this: what got you into law? Did you grow up watching Perry Mason reruns, and other girls are playing with, I don't know, Barbie dolls? You got lawyer Barbie, and they've got Doctor Barbie or something, or did you kind of stumble into law as like well, gee, I think maybe I'll try this, and I guess I just have an aptitude for it. And what specifically got you into criminal law? Because I know that can't be an easy realm to work in.
I know it's a brief podcast and we only have an hour, but I'll tell you that it's a combination of things. But I think the most meaningful, I don't know, the thing that had the most impact for me is that my brother, who was 8 years older than I am, was, I grew up in a family, I was born in the 60s, and my aunts and my mother and father were very socially conscious, and they valued that kind of outlook. And people had different opinions about things, trust me. My grandfather was from Cuba. My dad was Russian, my mother was Mexican. People had lots of different ideas, but it was a very socially conscious time, and that was valued. But my brother, who was 8 years my senior, was, my hero, and he was hilariously funny and really witty. But the thing about him was he really had a drive toward social justice, and he read about things and told me about, Che Guevara, and but he began in his teens to be addicted, and then he was schizophrenic. And slowly, as I got older, or as we both got older, he was mentally ill and addicted and became homeless. It was a very gradual process. There were times where we were, trying very hard to find him, and he would be back with us, and then there would be some issue. And I've seen these dynamics happen with people. So as I went through college, he would get arrested, and I would talk with his public defenders and try to explain to them his situation. And it was like, Jackie, you don't know anything. And that we don't care about that here. If you trespass or you did this thing, there was really no help. That was a long time ago. That was in the 80s and 90s. And so when I went to law school, he was really starting to get lost. And I began through law school riding my bike to try to find him. I would ride my bike from Santa Monica Police Department down to Dockweiler Beach and back, and that was 50 miles. And then I would go, and I was doing that because prior to that, even, and then the best way to find somebody who's homeless is like looking for a needle in a haystack, is to go to food lines. And so I would go to these soup kitchens and things. And so when I went to law school, the people that I studied for the bar with were addicts and homeless people who were doing flashcards with me and doing better than I was. And I'm not making that up. They were like, come on, duty, breach, causation, damages. This is easy. And over time, I thought that the people that were telling me that Mark was close by, or they had seen him or something, I thought those people were just telling me what I wanted to hear. And so I went from this sort of homeless community, or like a subculture in Hollywood and Santa Monica, to Santa Monica Beach. And then, and just before I graduated law school, like 2 months before, I did my law school party thing, graduation party plan and stuff. We learned that my brother had died, and he had been living under Lifeguard Tower 6, which I just visited yesterday. And that's in Santa Monica, right by the California Incline. And he'd been living there for a long time. And the people that were there at the food line and all of those folks were telling me the truth when they said that he was just here, just there. So I'll never know if he ever saw me. But but my thing was that, you know, he would have been a better lawyer than I am. I think I always had the feeling that I was doing this inspired by him, understanding the meaning and the need for this because of him. But Mark was braver and more inspired. I learned, but he was the one that would be like the teacher. So so that was my beginning. And in the beginning of my career, and I know I promise I'm going to make this shorter, but I remember public defenders telling me, "Aren't you the lawyer that handles those cases for the homeless population?" And I would say, "No, that's you." But I became sort of, I don't know, known for my interest in people who couldn't necessarily afford me, but I had the luxury of being able to take the cases that I wanted to take. I was in private practice from the beginning. And I've been happy to see that there's been a real change and a real movement to be smarter with the way we treat people who are in trouble and who need help and who maybe need healthcare instead of jailing. And so that's really where I come from. That's who I am.
Awesome. I'm sorry to hear about obviously the tragic loss of your brother, but it is interesting the way our lives kind of intertwine together, and sometimes it takes a tragedy like that to move us to do the things that we do, and we don't always know all the reasons why everything is the way that it is, but it looks like whatever else you could say, he helped you get on this trajectory in a very meaningful way, and it's probably made a difference in the lives of many, many hundreds, if not thousands of people. So I don't need to philosophize too much about this.
No,
Um,
I hope so. You never know, but I do hope so. And I think I do see him in my clients many times. And I think that it helps me because it's easy for all of us to sort of get used to the positive things that happen in our lives and think that we're somehow entitled to them. And so I know that I try to honor him by honoring my clients that need me.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. I noticed you have a bachelor's in psychology. Does that ever help when dealing with these sorts of tragic events? Is that something that you kind of fall back on, or is that just I got it as a BA and I thought it was interesting and I haven't touched it since?
You know, it was my major in college, but I actually didn't get my degree in psychology. But yeah, the way it actually, as a very concrete way, is that my sort of subspecialty is sex crimes defense, and that is all about behavioral sciences. And so clients regularly come to me and say, you know, how in the world am I gonna? I'm innocent, but who's ever gonna believe me? It's, you know, he said, she said, and why would she say that? Why would the 10-year-old say that? Or why would the woman say that, you know, it was unconsensual or something? And so too bad we don't edit much because I meant to say non-consensual. But, you know, like there are these ideas that people have, and even lawyers, I think, have these ideas that they don't want to take these kinds of cases because they seem sort of insurmountable. And the fact is that it's anything but that. And understanding the psychology and the behavioral sciences, understanding suggestibility, understanding, you know, the why in why people say this, or the context in which false accusations arise. And that's many of the cases that I see. Understanding the characteristics of personality, they're common to people who commit these types of crimes, sex offenses, and seeing the difference between that population, which we know a lot about, and you have to know your behavioral sciences to know this, compared to your client, all of those things, when the jury is finding those things out from these experts, all of a sudden, you know, at the end of your trial, they're saying, why are we even here? He's so clearly innocent. And so I think I mean, that happens time and again, really, it does. The last trial I did, the jurors waited around in the hallway and asked to talk to my expert, my forensic psychologist, because he was so fascinating. And they, you know, I put them on speaker and let the jury talk to him because he's really the one that won that trial. So, you know, it really has everything to do with the trials that I do. It has to do with murder trials that I do. It has to do with, you know, the human alarm reaction pattern and why people may act without intention. So I think understanding those things has always given me a basis for the cases, and to understand the cases, to understand how to prepare them, and how this may impact a jury in a very logical way, not relying on my, you know, personality to convince them to come my way, but really just to give them the science. I mean, my best days are when I get the science from the forensic psychologist expert of the prosecutor. So it's kind of, you know, unassailable information. And I think that's really helped in defending clients for me.
Awesome. Sorry, I was pondering anytime I talk to someone that does, psychology, particularly behavioral psychology, questions about free will and does it exist and are we free or are we purely behavioralists and whatnot. I'm not going to force you to go down the philosophical rabbit hole, but it's a question I always find fascinating. I have my degrees in philosophy and history, so I did a lot of my undergraduate work on the concept of free will and what it does and doesn't mean, et cetera. So I always find these discussions they percolate interesting ideas. So
They do. Like,
um,
let's not leave that. Let's just think for one moment. Imagine, the archetypal case where someone who is in like regular life has a brain tumor and he's got this tumor on his pituitary gland, and all of a sudden he's going around like humping everything in sight and he's taking his clothes off and, committing all of these like sex offenses. And then they operate on him, take out the tumor, and he's back to regular guy, family of five, high-rise office suite and doing all the right things and doing all of these pro-social things with his life. Most of the time people think, oh my gosh, that's why you did this. We know the switch to flip. And so that wasn't his free will. That was the tumor in his head. And
yeah.
so we all have some version of that tumor. We all have chemistry and we don't all start off in the same place. So I agree with you. I personally think that comes down for me to, I guess it's a podcast. I'm supposed to let you talk, but for me,
No,
if you're
it's your
asked,
podcast. I'm just here to host.
but for me, it means that it's all the more evidence that the system that we have, this criminal legal system that we employ, should have nothing to do with judgment. Who cares why people do the things we do? If we think about that, if we let ourselves think that the government should care about the judgment, the positive law aspects of there should be retribution, there should be punishment for that wrong, you lose sight of the more important things, which is let's make sure this bad thing doesn't happen to another person in the community. Let's make good neighbors. Let's figure out why this happened and how we can make it not happen. And if you can do that, divorcing yourself from any judgment for real. And by the way, victims of crime can't do that. I wouldn't be able to do that as a victim of crime. So we shouldn't look to them for input on this issue, or on particular issues like sentencing and things like that, which is what we do in this country. It's pretty crazy to me. But the idea then of just kind of using the science and using the data that we understand to make ourselves more happy, to make ourselves safer, to make sure that someone else doesn't get hurt or lose their property, or other people can thrive in this community and everybody can own a home. All of those things I think are the more pro-social aspects of a system that can really correct. What we have is something that does the opposite. But that little kernel that you talk about is really, I think, at the heart of what I understand as the thing we need to do. I mean, without getting into like morality or religion or anything like that, just from a scientific point of view or a very utilitarian point of view, it doesn't make sense to try to judge people. It's really about like, how do we just fix it?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting take. I think it's hard to not get into questions of morality once you start talking about free will, because it seems to be the case that if we're, here's what I will say, and I'll let my listeners know my opinion on this, and I'm not here to proselytize anybody on anything. That's not the
No,
point
come
of the show, but there seems to be the case that if we are purely physical beings and there's nothing beyond the physical, then I couldn't understand how we couldn't be purely deterministic critters, right? At the end of the day, we don't fault vinegar for reacting with baking soda when it gets poured. But I fault you if you pour vinegar into my baking soda, make it foam up when I was in the middle of cooking, right? So there seems to be something at play where either we're hallucinating, or there's something about us that is beyond the natural, supernatural. I think the concept of free will truly requires some part of us to not be a physical entity. So if you're going to posit free will, you have to posit something supernatural, meta natural, something beyond the natural in us, which I find fascinating. And I think we intrinsically do that because that's the whole point of laws in general. Like we don't want murder, not because we find it distasteful, but because we find it wrong. We find it, evil. We don't want people to torture 3-year-olds because not because it's distasteful to me. Like, oh, I would prefer to not, torture 3-year-olds to death for fun and profit, but because I honestly think that's legitimately a bad thing to do. I think rape is a bad thing to do, and we ought to have laws. So it hits so many different levels of what structures our society, how it functions, how we operate, how we engage with it. I find it fascinating. I really do. So, and again, I'm posing just the questions. I'm not going to pose the answers right now. If my listeners can read between the lines, they know where I sit. But it's
I'm with
fascinating.
you.
It's a whole
I'm
the
with
whole
you.
realm is really fascinating.
Yeah, we could pose similar questions back and forth. I mean, I think that's really, let's just do that podcast instead because that's super fascinating. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I don't disagree with that.
Well, there we go. Well, let me ask you a little more practical of a question. We just got through, in fact, I read a sponsor, nationalerc.org, talking about the pandemic, something we all got through, and hopefully we're never going to go back through again, right? Though it is an election year, so I'm told that the next one's right around the corner, according to some people. So, but obviously, lots of different people had lots of different reactions to the pandemic, lots of different states, lots of different towns, cities, municipalities, all reacted in very different ways. How, Jackie, did the pandemic affect you and your firm? How did it affect the way that you relate with your clients? How did it affect the way that you serve your clients in court? Did you have to Zoom into hearings? Did you do a Zoom trial? Did you have to present before a Zoom jury? Or was it just things were paused and then they resumed?
I had my last trial. It was a death penalty trial. It started off as, but I argued for voluntary manslaughter, got it right on, I think the 15th or the 13th of March. The next day, the court was closed. And I was not really aware of all of the things that were going on because I was in trial and you don't barely sleep. But I noticed that
You're
I
in your own
remember,
little world.
yeah, but I remember saying, why are there so many people in this elevator and kind of no one in the building? And it was because, there were still some trials going on, but I remember thinking like, isn't there something going on out there? So, after, they came out with their verdict, that was the end of that. And actually after the trial was finished, I started to realize, how serious this was. And so, we very quickly, we turned on a dime, and I give, the people that I work with so much credit. I mean, for so many things, and this is just one tiny example, but it was just, everybody had laptops. We left the building. We all worked remotely. We had the ability to work remotely. We were already able to work remotely. Everything that we have in our system is all, online. And so we had Zoom meetings every day at noon. I would be in court on Zoom every morning, and then we would do everything we would do. But it turned out that we became much more efficient because instead of having meetings when I'd come back from court and giving, assignments to the paralegals, and they would come back and talk with me about the assignments, and then I'd go right into client meetings and things. Instead of that, what was happening is that from 12:30 to 1:30 every day, there was, and sometimes longer, because mostly longer, it was everybody. It was the receptionist, it was the investigator, it was the other associate attorneys or the research attorneys that were working with me at the time. There were the paralegals and the, administrative assistants that do things like, look at marketing. So there were people that were otherwise not normally part of those meetings involved in the cases. And I think that we learned a really good lesson that there was this holistic way to treat the client and to treat our cases in a way when we thought we were doing that already, quite frankly, but we just learned to be even better at it. I mean, a lot better at it, quite frankly. And I also, there were a lot of things that we changed in order to make sure that I was still financially responsible for the livelihoods of the people that I worked with. And so at that time, I think there were probably between 9 and 12 people and, working with my firm. And so I just really had that kind of this obligation, and we all just rolled up our sleeves and fought for them. And we did some really great things. I think clients got wonderful results during that time. We never stopped being busy. I think that the lessons that we learned then have really impacted. I mean, honestly, I don't see clients in the office very much anymore at all. I don't see new ones in the office ever. And, I see the occasional current client, but it turns out we don't really need to. And we continue to do the same things in order to keep ourselves efficient and to keep ourselves involved. Every one of us is involved in every case. And the ideas that all of us have and the connection that we all have to our clients in that way, I think continues on. So I'm oddly grateful for the lessons learned out of COVID.
It made things a lot simpler in a lot of ways, streamlined a lot of processes, made the world a lot smaller in a real sense, which I
Yeah.
think is fascinating. Did you ever have to present in front of a jury that was zooming in, or I've heard some people, wax about whether that would be a terrible idea. And I've heard some people, I talk with a lot of, injury attorneys as well. And they're like, the one thing I think is most important is, you're in a case and the defense is in this case, because they're plaintiff attorneys, the defense makes a statement and you know that it's wrong and you look over at the juror and they look at you and you connect, visually eye to eye. And it really syncs something, like SYNC, syncs things up between the attorney and the juror in some way that I think a Zoom trial will be really hard to do. Like even right now, I'm making eye contact with you, but I'm not actually making eye contact with you. I'm looking at the lens of my camera to simulate eye contact with you, which is really weird and meta. And for those of you who are just watching the podcast now, you're seeing how the sausage is made.
I
But
was just gonna
I mean,
say.
that's
But
the
yeah,
that's the reality of anyone in TV, right? They're never looking at you; they're simulating looking at you by looking into the camera. But it's just fascinating. So, would you ever present in front of a Zoom jury? Would you do anything you could to not present in front of a Zoom jury? And
yes.
side note, have you ever been on a jury?
I've never been on a jury, and I lament that so much. And I knew once I became a lawyer that was probably never going to happen, and it hasn't. Um, but
Make
to get
psychologists get psychoanalyzed. We ought to make lawyers sit on a jury at least once. Let them kind of understand the back end.
yeah, I mean that would be good for us. I think we ought to make before somebody's a judge, we ought to make them anonymously go into jail for 24 hours, just 24 hours, because these people are putting people away for their lives. How big an ask is that? But I digress. Your
That's
first
a
question.
fascinating concept.
Right? I mean, but shouldn't they? It shouldn't be weird to say,
You,
24
you ought to
hours.
know what you're sentencing other people to. No, I
You
don't
absolutely
necessarily
should.
disagree with that.
Um, so yeah, there's two competing ideas with doing with Zoom juries during the COVID shutdown, during the COVID lockdown. And that is one of them is that you need to get access to the jury, access to justice for clients that are just languishing in jails who need to have their day in court. And so there's a push, there's an interest, I should say, to have that trial. And if we can't have juries in person, then we need to have it in whatever form we have to, because otherwise people are just day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, innocent people unable to access the system in order to get their day in court. So that is a legitimate pull. On the other side, I have a terror that that all of the things that I'm accustomed to doing in a trial and the art of persuasion in that trial would be so different and so profoundly impacted by a Zoom trial, including worries that people would be like jurors would be able to do a whole lot of things like text and look at other right and do their own research and all of those things make for a
I didn't even
very
think about that. Yeah, they could be pulling
innocent,
up
yeah,
because
and
they could
in
be encountering the outside world and getting a biased information or biased opinion just by sitting there and yeah, it'd be harder to
or not
police.
paying attention,
Yeah.
having the television on behind you or having your kids in the room. I mean, any number of aspects of that are obviously problematic in a concrete way, as opposed to this sort of other, soft science way of can I really have the same impact on people and persuade them in the same way? And I think those other things, those kind of concrete things, terrify me more. But so I never had to, when someone's life is on the line, you don't really want to say like, okay, well, let's learn on the job on this one. And
Yeah.
so I really actually never had to do that. But I did have a trial. Once I started having trials, we had PPE and we had, plexiglass around the witnesses and in front of the jury. And that was odd. And sometimes there were jurors behind me, which was not comfortable, but it turns out that it didn't impact the verdicts, thank God. And so, we had success, even though it was a little bit different, stilted. But But I know, and I think that statistically, I think the defense did fine overall on those kinds of trials. So, and criminal defense lawyers are a little bit more aligned with maybe plaintiffs' personal injury lawyers because we represent the individual against the sort of larger body, right? I'm against the government. Personal injury lawyers are against the defense, like insurance
Usually the insurance
company,
company. Yeah.
and those are like the big government. So, so I do think that like
Fight for the little guy.
I think it, yeah, and I think it, as it turned out, I think the statistics benefited the little guy in those remote trials. But, it's a very inexact science, right? So I never had to do it.
No, that makes sense. And it really is. It's a game of persuasion. I don't say game, but I mean, it really is. It's a matter of being able to persuade people, and it's just easier to persuade people in person quite often, I think. So, and be able to read people, get an understanding of what they're going through, and Zoom definitely puts kind of a filter on that, I guess, at the end of the day. Well, let me ask you this, and this is the only gotcha question I have. I already warned you about it, so you've had time to prepare. You've been practicing law for a while now, and nobody who goes to bat enough times hits 1,000, right? Eventually, you strike out here or there. And I'm sure, Jackie, at some point in your career, you've had at least one or two setbacks or things you would consider to be a failure. But I'm a firm believer, as my listeners know, that it's only a failure if you fail to learn from it, right? And as long as you learn from it, it's a slow burn win. So can you let my listeners know about some time in your career, maybe early on, maybe last week, whenever it happened to be, when you experienced a failure of some kind, but what did you learn from that? And how do you carry that forward to make sure that you're representing your clients the best? Again, like you said, lives are on the line. How are you always honing your skill and honing your game?
You know, you told me that you were going to have that question right before you just started into all the other questions, so I object. But
Dane.
I,
Oh, wait, no.
I think that it's hard for me to even name one thing, to be fair. I think as you grow and learn, as you continue on in whatever profession, you're making mistakes as you go. One of the things I think I did was I think early on, I was lucky in trials. I was always lucky in trials, but I thought that juries were smarter sometimes. Or no, I guess I took for granted certain things. And I didn't try in every case to begin at the very beginning and take them with baby steps. And I would sometimes, like I did, I had a trial one time where I felt like I was so far out ahead and I was winning. And even the court staff were saying things to me, which they rarely do, about just kind of like, like, you got this. Like I felt like it's obvious that I'm winning this trial.
Yeah.
It was obvious to me, but it was not obvious to the jury. And one of the things I said to the jury was, I said that the people have the burden. I was talking about the burden of proof, but I said, you have to assume my client is innocent. And I didn't really take that any farther. And because I didn't take that further, they went in the jury room and very literally said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We have to assume that he's innocent, and we'll go around the table to see if there's any evidence that he's not. And everybody had something, of course. And it literally put the burden upside down. It gave me the burden, and they came back with the guilty verdict. And they all were in the hallway afterwards saying, we thought we would acquit, but you told us that we had to do that. And when we did that, we kind of came out to and I litigated that issue. I had declarations from these jurors. I went back and I was telling this judge, like, no, you got to go to your trial. And he didn't. I mean, he rightly so. I mean, jury has the ability to make their decisions in their own way. I mean, as long as they're not flipping a coin, they can take the instructions that we give them and the input from the from the lawyers. Can we cut that part out? And decide on their own what they're going to give merit or what they're going to give more impact to in those arguments, and they come up with their own verdict. So it's really sacrosanct. And so I learned a really tough lesson. Thank God my client didn't have to do any jail time as a result of that. But that was a big goof, I guess.
Well, that's interesting because that actually goes back to what we were talking about earlier in a sense, right? That's that imposter syndrome where you just assume everyone knows what you know, right? You're like, it's such a commonplace thing for you. Probably for, you said the people in the courtroom, the staff, et cetera, were kind of saying the same thing. And it's probably because they hear this day in and day out. They know what a
Right.
good case sounds like. They know what a bad case sounds like. And like, oh man, you got this in the bag. Because I've heard this 100 times. And seldom did they go this well. But then the jury doesn't. And
Right.
they get a little confused on what the instructions are, and that's all it takes to unwind a case a little bit. So it really is. It's that imposter syndrome, which is a fascinating phenomenon that so many of us do struggle with. The flip side, of course, is I'm sure in 30 years you've had some wonderful successes. I'm sure sometimes you're falling asleep at night, and as you're falling asleep, you're thinking about a case. You're like, oh man, I can't believe that worked out so well. I can't believe things went so well. Jackie, what's one or two of the cases you're most proud of, or the accomplishments in your legal profession that you're most proud of? The proverbial feathers in your cap, so to speak.
Hmm. Those are easier answers, right? I think we're all, maybe I'm just an egomaniac because I like this question better. But
That's fine.
um,
Nobody likes introspection. Nobody likes having to own up to failure. I
and the
totally
truth is,
understand.
yeah, and the last answer I probably would do differently if we had more time because there's probably bigger things that I've learned along the way. But that aside, um, I think the biggest, like when I look back, there's a couple of things that I'm proud of. And one of them, I guess, is the Chelsea Becker case. I wouldn't normally use actual names, but it's been something that she's agreed to do is to give her name out, and it's been widely publicized. But Chelsea Becker was a woman who had been charged with murder. She was actually the second one who had been charged with murder up in Kings County in Hanford, California. It's a Central Valley. And during the pandemic, actually right before the pandemic is when I got this case. And I was asked to take a look at it by a woman named Lynn Paltrow. And as a result of my connection with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And Lynn Paltrow, who is truly a remarkable, brilliant woman, was then the director of the National Association for Pregnant, or National Advocates, I'm sorry, for Pregnant Women. And so I pretty quickly agreed to represent Chelsea Becker pro bono. And the reason was that in this county, they were charging women criminally with murder for the outcomes of their pregnancies. Chelsea Becker was alleged to have used drugs during her pregnancy that they say caused her late miscarriage. And so I represented Chelsea. First, we got her out. It was a joint effort. It was a group effort. But as lead counsel for that case, I was really very much aware of my responsibilities, and I was the one going in and making these court appearances. And sometimes it was during the height of the pandemic when it was terrifying, actually, to drive my car, just to put on like PPE and get in my car and drive and not know, where am I gonna stay? And is it okay to stay there? And am I gonna catch this thing? And there's no vaccine for it. And would I come back, and how long am I going to be? Could I give it to my family? Could I give it to my mother? And so that was a tough time, really, in a lot of ways, like, on like four-dimensionally, but ultimately we prevailed on that case. And so Chelsea Becker was not convicted, and she's doing so remarkably well. She's in college. She's about to graduate. She's doing so much. And I mean, so much to I think speak back to any naysayers about who had the right idea. I mean, I was buoyed in my efforts by many organizations, healthcare organizations, who were supportive of Chelsea Becker, saying that this is a healthcare issue, not a criminal issue, and the pro-social idea is to help her and to help women like her, and not to make other pregnant women afraid to go and have help when they need it. And then later, I was a very tiny, tiny, tiny part of the effort to go back and undo the previous prosecution of another woman named Dora Perez. And so Dora Perez had been sentenced to 11 years when she took a deal for a manslaughter. And she had served, I think, 5 or 6 years of that sentence by the time Chelsea Becker got charged. So we were able to undo the conviction of Adora Perez after Chelsea Becker it it ended. I mean, the DA that was part of all of the DA of the county, his name was Fagundes. He very shortly after that case was challenged by another person who ran for DA, and probably in large part because of this case, he was ousted, and there's a new DA, and they no longer, and across the state of California, they no longer charge murder for women for the outcomes of their pregnancies. And moreover, the legislature was paying attention, and they've enacted legislation to preserve the rights of women in those instances. And so, it's that kind of impactful litigation, and a good outcome too is, obviously fantastic. And it sounds like I'm taking credit for it. I had a large role. I mean, she was my client, but I absolutely don't know that I would have been able to pull this off. It was the work of Lynn Paltrow and others, and the many folks who were writing amicus briefs, including the Attorney General. So we were really assisted, first by Javier Becerra, and then later by Bonta and their staffs. So it was very much a joint effort, and I was just sort of a part of it, but it will always be something that I'm very proud of. And, we accomplished our goal. The Irvine 11 case is another one where I was just lucky to be there. And those folks, those young men were brave and right. and they were strong enough, and that community was strong enough. They taught me so much about standing up to government and some preconceived notions of folks that needed to be corrected. And they were willing to do that, and willing to put themselves on the line to bring attention to an issue that, as we can see, is very, very important.
I ask you, and you're welcome to just plead the fifth on this one. But the Becker case, I actually remember hearing about this because it did create a bit of a national stir. And part of the reason was, if I understand correctly, and I'm not going to try and be overly political here, and I know this is a very thorny issue with people on both sides feeling very strongly about it, but my understanding is in California, you can get an abortion up to the 9th month, and nobody faces criminal charges in those situations. But in this Becker situation, the child died, and I was glancing at the New York Times article, and Mr. Ebenshade, I'm guessing was opposing counsel, said the case hinged on whether California's penal code exempts pregnant women from criminal liability in cases like these. Quote, "It is not a case about abortion or women's reproductive rights," he said. "It's a case about a person who did specific acts that resulted in the death of a viable fetus." I thought that was a fascinating thing because it feels so maybe just hypocritical, like to say that, resulting in the death one way is, I mean, it makes total sense. Regardless of how you feel about abortion, if the mother is intending to carry the child to term, and somebody comes in and punches her in the stomach and causes her to lose a child, that makes total sense, right? But if that's in a very different moral framework from, abortion versus did she do whatever drugs or not drugs or whatever it happens to be that ultimately caused the death of the child. How is that even squared? I mean, I know that with Roe no longer being the law of the land, and California has their constitutional amendments, it's almost a moot issue now. But at that time, that wasn't the case. How was that tension resolved, if I can ask that question?
So the way the statute read, there was a theoretical exception, an exemption from the homicide statute in 187 that was meant to carve out a situation for abortions, that an abortion wouldn't be charged as a murder. By the way, the law in California on abortions being legal up to the 9th month is not entirely accurate, but under certain circumstances, yes.
I'm spitballing, and I'm not a legal expert, so.
So it's not, I mean, I just don't want people to think like, oh my God, California is letting people, kill babies, because, it's not really the thing.
Right.
And by the way, probably not the thing to say on a podcast, but whatever.
But it's a reality on the ground. It's how people understand the topic. I'm a child of rape. So my listeners know I've actually been active on the pro-life side, but I'm also very objective and I can talk about the law, qua law, and just try to understand the thing as it is, right? So I think it's very important to be able to kind of step back from our positions and just talk about the thing. But I find it a fascinating tension point. I remember these discussions when it happened. So anyway, continue.
Yeah, and so I think I would be the last person that they might. I mean, I think had people understood that I was pro-life, that they might not choose me to represent Chelsea Becker. I am anti-criminalization, and I'm also sort of pro mind your own business a little bit, and like but I'm very anti-criminalization, and I'm very, as you know, big picture anti-blame. Also, there's a difference between the morality of someone looking you right in the eye and deciding I want you to die, and another person who under different circumstances kills somebody accidentally because of some, I mean, there's different levels of homicide. We already agree
Oh,
to
yeah.
that. And some, if it's self-defense or whatever, sometimes it's even justified and it's not a criminal act when you take the life of someone intentionally. And then there's all the negligence stuff. So already we know that we look at this in shades of gray. And so for me to judge somebody else in any, in the abortion arena, for me, I think is not appropriate ever. But that said, it doesn't mean that I actually think that a human being begins at conception. Not everybody does. I think so. And so that does give rise to like all kinds of other questions about how do you write laws for this? How do you do the right thing, for a community? So one of the things you brought up was that, and I would say to you this, there are laws against, certain types of intentional homicide, and then there are other like freedoms that we have, and they come together not perfectly ever. And there's always going to be this give and take. So in terms of the exemption for to allow for abortion not to be a murder, it was written specifically as if a third party who is doing the killing would be responsible. That would be a human being. The fetus would be a full human being for the purpose of the intentional killing. So if someone sees a pregnant woman and shoots her in the belly, that fetus is, according to 187 of California's Penal Code, that fetus is a live human being for the purpose of the elements of murder against another person, against a third party. The problem was for us, that subsection was very poorly drafted. It wasn't entirely clear that it only applied to these third parties, although that's definitely what they meant to do. But, and I say that now, I think safely, but I wish it had been, I mean, I think it was clear enough. And if you look at the intent of the legislators when they put that legislation together, it's very clear. And if you follow the intent, you get to only one conclusion, and that is that it wasn't meant to criminalize women for the outcomes of the pregnancy. But it wasn't as clearly drafted as I would have liked. And so that's why you have these arguments about, I mean, that's one of the reasons why you have arguments about within the gray area, what about this? And you can do that all day long. In fact, you could do that literally all day long about every part of the gray area. And every place we want to say that this is for sure this is my one truth, and I know this to be true, and therefore I'm going to take that to the nth degree. And you'll find yourself in every instance on the wrong side of your own morality. It's really thorny.
It is. It really is. And the law tries to be as neutral as possible, but this is the interesting intersection of philosophy and law. I mean, it really is. It's beyond fascinating. I think one of the reasons I never got into law is because I don't think I'd ever be able to get past those questions and just be constantly looking at those. So anyway, I appreciate your insights on it. And I'm sorry to kind of derail you and ask you questions out of left field, but again, they're just the most fascinating questions to ask sometimes. And so that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to ask the really good questions. Well, let me ask you a different question that's also a really difficult question. How do you how do I want to say this? How do you balance empathy for your clients with objectivity? when it comes to whether something did or did not happen, or the liability for the thing that did happen, et cetera. Where's the tension point, and how do you deal with cases that are emotionally or morally challenging?
It's pretty easy. I never met a person I couldn't learn to love once I heard their story. That's not, I heard that. I don't know who to attribute it to, but that is, I think, the most often remembered quote for me day to day. And it's really true. And the thing is that I used to think in the very beginning it was true that I could have been a prosecutor, I could have been a defense lawyer, and they vice versa, because we meet the families of our clients, I meet the client themselves, and you get to know everything about them and their humanity. And then my job is to get in front of the train and make sure they don't get killed by it, they didn't get hit by it. And that's my nature, is to get in the way of harm and not to judge. I mean, I think maybe as an effort at my own redemption. But I think that prosecutors, if I'm going to give them the credit that they, I'm sure, deserve, they come in and they think about their alleged victim, and they emote for that person. They love that person. They have empathy for that person. They humanize that person, and they want justice for their idea of justice, to bring some measure of comfort to the people, either the person who's still living or the family of the person who's no longer with them. And it's really kind of the same thing. We're doing like the opposite sides of the same coin. But it's, I think, very easy for me as I do this now to say that I have zero qualms about standing in harm's way for someone. To me, that is my moral obligation. My own, we've talked about some really kind of deep things, but my moral requirement is that I am the last friend to the most reviled of my brothers. I'm the one who gets to stand in harm's way if I can. And it's easier for me because I'm not in trouble. So I can stand there and take the hits for a client who's afraid, and I can be the angel that they're praying for, or that their family is praying for. And if I don't do that job the way they're hoping I would, then I should step aside, because I'm keeping the right person away from them. And that is doing harm. It's not just that I didn't do a good enough job. It's that I've got to do the best job, or else I took the place of the person that was going to do the best job, and I'm responsible for that harm. So for me, it's a really major responsibility, but I take it gratefully. I mean, if I got in trouble, there's no place else I'd rather, I mean, maybe like there's one or two other law firms where I'd feel semi-comfortable, but everything I know about my firm and the people that are with me, mostly because of the people that I work with, a smart, capable, and dedicated people. That's what I would want to have in a lawyer. So, I don't know if I still have imposter syndrome so much. I probably have too much of an ego now, but I do think that it to the extent I do, it's helpful, but it I think makes me feel like I never look at somebody and judge them because they're the ones in the crosshairs right now. And when I talk to new clients, I kind of feel bad for them because they've got to tell me all of this stuff about them. And I sometimes have to tell them, like, listen, I know we're not talking about my worst day right now, so don't worry. I'm not judging you. Just tell me. And I think it's hard for people, but I think it's quite the privilege that I get to be that, I don't know, like that person that's sort of the confessor or whatever. I never ask my clients if they did the thing. I mean, in very, very rare instances, I think I probably can remember one or two times. It matters to me in the context of like, how can I get you out of trouble? Like, did you do the thing? But I don't normally even think to ask. I mean, it's such a foreign idea to me. I don't concern myself with it. My job is to represent people that might falsely confess, that might lie to me about being guilty because they're protecting somebody else. I mean, my job is to assume they are factually innocent, and how can I get them out of harm's way, get them back to the life that they were supposed to be living before they got in trouble. And I have zero moral problem with it. I feel like I'm the one that wears the white hat in that whole scenario. And I think even more is, as I've learned over the years, what an evil system we have, what a racist system we have, what a classist system we have, this caste system that puts people into some of the most, I mean, in the United States, we have some of the most violent and deadly prisons in the world. We live here all siloed, thinking that we don't. We tell ourselves some weird lie. But I mean, the facts don't lie. If you're a correctional officer, you have a 12-year lower life expectancy. Never mind the people that are convicted. These are the people that put in their 8-hour days. So it is really, I mean, there's today, there are over 1,000 people that there's no oversight, by the way. So this is what they are willing to tell us. It's a very, very, very low estimation, but over 1,000 people that the correctional officers, the wardens, tell us about who have been unabated in solitary confinement for more than a decade in the space the size of a car parking space. And the entire world understands torture in solitary confinement, that is this virtually no human interaction and no movement, etc. More than 14 days or more than 15 days is the norm, where they say that that's now it's torture, because now the harm that comes from that, not just the mental harm, but even physical harm that comes from that, is beginning to be irreversible. It may be irreversible come day 15. And so the whole world, I think, virtually all of the world sort of signs on to that idea. And yet there's 1,000 or more people that we know of who have not come out of solitary confinement. Albert Woodfox died a couple of years ago during COVID. He was the person who had been the longest in solitary confinement in the United States that we know of, because again, there's no real oversight. And that was about 42 years. 42 years. So yeah, I don't have a problem. Like, I don't care what someone did. We incarcerate too many people. We incarcerate them in a terrible place. We literally torture them. We subject them to hot and cold climates. We don't give them the comforts. You may be mad at them. We all might be mad at people and think they did something bad, but we are all hurt by what we do to our brothers, and we have to, our brothers and sisters, and we have to dehumanize them. We have to look away from them in order to do that. But our system is set up that somehow at the edge of that sword are prosecutors and jurors and others that believe that what they're doing, because they do it out of the goodness of their heart, I know that, but they believe that being soldiers for that system is the right thing to do. And I know that's not right. I know that's not true. So I never have a day when I think, oh, my morals, I don't know, like, did you do it? I don't know. For me, it's a matter, it would always have been a matter of, in a good system, if you did it, how do we make sure it never happens again, with no interest in moral judgment other than I'm not going to hurt you. And if you can never get out again, you can never get out again. If we can't fix you, you can't get out again. But we need to make sure that we can, make good neighbors and not spend all of our money on this torture.
That's sorry, something's printing next to me all of a sudden. Gosh, that's intense. We're at the end of our hour here, and I don't want to eat up your entire day. You've already been incredibly generous with the time that you've given me, Jackie. Here in a minute, I'm going to ask you my 2 closing questions that my listeners always look for. Question number 1, just to kind of let you percolate on these for a minute, will be, if we can go back in time, meet young Jackie, what advice would you give yourself and why? Other than the obvious, buy a lot of Bitcoin, hold it till, 60K or whatever, right? And then question number 2 is, if I gave you my magic pencil, I used to have a magic pen and somebody ran off. Oh, you know what? Hang on a second. Found it. It's the magic pen. This pen here came from a Benedictine abbey in Atchison, Kansas. A bunch of monks, one of the priests must have blessed this pen or something, because this pen has the ability to strike laws from the books, edit laws that are on the books, and add new laws to the books. And if I were to loan you this pen, this miraculous pen, and you could make one change, what would you change and why? While you percolate on that, we're going to jump back over and take a look at your website. As a reminder, I am talking with Jackie Goodman, who runs CaliforniaDefenseLawyer.net. That is the Goodman Criminal Litigation Specialist out in California. Jackie is board certified, State of Bar of California. has been practicing for over 30 years. And if you're not convinced at this point that if you're in California and you've got a legal issue, a criminal legal issue, and she's not your best go-to, I don't know what else I could do to convince you, because she has just a wealth of information, a wealth of insight, and just I'm incredibly impressed with everything that I've heard. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this call as well. But again, if you want to reach out to her, you can go to californiadefenselawyer.net or give her a call at 714-266-3945. As always, we will have those links first thing down in the bottom in the description of this call. So if you want to reach out to her, please feel free to do that. She has a contact us button. I'm sure there's lots of different ways, call, text, email, etc., where you can book a time to speak with her. If somebody wants to speak with you, do they get like an initial consultation, like they can talk to you and talk for free initially, or do they talk with a specialist or your receptionist? How does that work out if people want to book with you, Jackie,
It's
or your
me.
firm?
Yeah,
Okay.
they just, yeah, my cell phone number's on my card, and I think it's somewhere on my website also, but if they call in, they get me. They can talk. Even after hours, I'll get a text saying that this person, needs some help.
Okay.
So
Well, there you
my
go.
paralegals here will speak with people that call in first, obviously, and often just set an appointment so that they talk with me. And 24/7. I mean, I was on the phone with a new client yesterday that was in some trouble. So yeah, I'm pretty accessible. I mean, I'm entirely accessible.
Please don't text her at 3 a.m.
That's all I
Uh,
answer.
well, unless it's actually a real emergency, right? And
Yeah.
your rights are being violated. So, we're going to jump over and read from our final sponsor here. Our final sponsor today is Rank with News. Is not being in the news regularly costing your firm or your business credibility and visibility? Do you feel that getting found in Google search is more about dumb luck than science? What if there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or your business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Bloomberg, Forbes, AP News, Reuters, and others, sometimes in as little as a few hours, and seeing those articles ranking nationally, locally, sometimes again in under a few hours for major competitive keywords that people are actually searching for? If there was, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page one in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and permanently. It's like guaranteed SEO or search engine optimization on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking long term. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business, visit rankwithnews.com to learn more and book a time to speak with one of our specialists about featuring your firm or business in major national 8-figure traffic sites that can launch you to page one of Google in a matter of a few hours and help you dominate your local marketplace. Get media exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more customers and clients with rankwithnews.com. All right, so we travel back in time, Jackie, and we meet young Jackie, maybe fresh out of law school, and you're able to go over and just whisper a couple of pieces of advice without throwing off the whole space-time continuum. What advice would you give yourself, and why?
Hmm. I would say be fearless. Don't be afraid. I think I spent a lot of time feeling unworthy or not up to the task. And I think I maybe would have been, I think I maybe wasted a lot of time doing that, but I don't know. Like you said, it's a butterfly effect. I mean, if I wasn't afraid, I wouldn't have spent, you know, all the time in the office and doing all that work to make sure I was always prepared. So I don't know, but I do think that I spent a lot of years not trusting in my abilities as much as I probably should have.
It's good advice. That's good life advice that I think anyone could benefit from. And hindsight's 2020. And obviously, our failures and successes shape who we are. So we don't want to monkey with who we've become usually. But nevertheless, I think that's good advice. And of course, there's always the Bitcoin thing, right? So, so
I should.
question number two. I give you my magic pen, this miraculous pen, and with it, you can strike a law, you can edit a law, you can change a law. You can only do one, unfortunately. And this can be a law with sweeping ramifications on a national or even international level, or it could just be, getting rid of parking tickets or something like that, or the law that makes you fill out, forms in triplicate 8 times a week. What law, Jackie, would you change and why?
Is it only for law? Because there's so much I want the pen for. Um, I think I would do this. I would make all of criminal law in our, at least in our country, and maybe if I could, the world, I suppose, I would treat it the way, much like we treat the not guilty by reason of insanity. Like if somebody commits a murder here and they are found not guilty by reason of insanity, it means that the jury found that they did the thing, they committed the homicide, and not only a homicide, but a murder, that they intentionally killed another human being with malice aforethought. But then there's a second trial, and if they find that they did that thing, they were guilty because of their mental state, without getting into that, then they're not put in prison. They are put into essentially a conservatorship. They're put into a mental health institution, and they are not released ever unless and until they're healthy. And a body is looking at them to determine whether they think that they're ready to be released back into society. And that may mean never, but it doesn't have to be never. It means whenever they're healthy again, whenever we can trust, and lots of different people have to come to the decision that that person can be trusted out in the community. I wish every single thing that we prosecuted was treated in the same way. It doesn't mean that I think that I'm a prison abolitionist, if you haven't figured that out by now, very much so. But I don't believe that we should just, it's not because I want to sort of burn it down and have complete chaos. I think that what is better is to have a system that is designed without judgment, just about how do we make you better. And so if it takes, someone who committed a robbery some amount of time for us to make you better, it means that we're not trying to harm you in that place. It means we have to have that place that's comfortable. I don't care. You hear people saying, oh, they live a better life, we're spending money on blah, blah, blah. Who cares, right? Like, stop being jealous of the places that, previously unhoused people are living in now. Just get people better. And if we can do that, we would do that for so much less money. We'd have so much more money to put into all the things we want to put it into, to home buying, for example, for everybody. So there are just so many societal ills that are caused and continued by our criminal legal system, by the carceral system in the United States. It's completely wrong-headed. And so if I could change only one thing, I would change all of it, and I don't really mean that I would do nothing. I don't want to be hurt. I don't want my family to be hurt. I don't want to be the victim of a crime. But in order for us all to be safer and to be wealthier and to be healthier, we really, I think, need to just keep our eye on the ball, get people healthy, get people back to being productive, and forget about this sort of idea of, an eye for an eye kind of stuff.
I've heard that an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. So I think there's some wisdom to that. Well, Jackie, thank you very much again for taking the time to talk with me. Are there any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
No, Justin, I want to keep talking to you.
Have you back on.
No,
We'll do a sequel. We'll dive into the deep, thorny moral problems.
that would be fascinating. No, this has been really interesting. You're so interesting. So thank you for being so generous with your time with me, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. This has been The Attorney Post. As always, I am your host, Justin West. I've been chatting with Jacqueline Goodman of the Goodman Criminal Litigation. Again, CaliforniaDefenseLawyer.net is her information. Down below in the box, we'll have all the other information as well if you want to get a hold of her. As always, though this podcast does deal with lots of legal topics, it does not constitute legal advice. And if you have a legal issue, you should always seek the advice of a competent attorney in your area who focuses on the matter that you need help with. Now, obviously, if you're in a criminal issue, particularly in the state of California or Massachusetts, I think that Jacqueline would be an amazing resource for you, which is, again, why we put her information down below. As far as the podcast goes, if you're watching this on YouTube, we always appreciate a like, a subscribe, and a share. If you're listening on any of the podcast repositories, please feel free to rate us or comment or whatever it makes sense. And the most important thing is if you know someone who could benefit from hearing this information, somebody facing a criminal defense issue themselves, perhaps share this podcast with them, help them to understand their rights. Because as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Until next time, thanks for listening, guys, and take care.